Picture a piece of paper, right, signed like 64 years ago. An international agreement that somehow survived, multiple full-scale wars.
Yeah, border skirmishes, decades of intense geopolitical hostility.
Exactly. And for over half a century, it was held up to the entire world as the absolute gold standard of diplomacy.
Right, a real triumph.
But then, in April 2025, India effectively tore it up. So today, we're doing a deep dive into how a meticulously crafted water-sharing agreement became, well, the ultimate geopolitical weapon. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that to really understand this story, you have to realize we aren't just talking about water.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about geography, basic human survival, and the cold calculus of statecraft. When you strip away all the polite diplomatic language from this treaty,
The legal jargon.
exactly, the jargon, you are looking at the literal lifeblood of millions of people in South Asia. And when that lifeblood is threatened, the entire regional security architecture just destabilizes.
So for you listening, to really grasp the magnitude of what happened in 2025, we have to establish the baseline first. We're rewinding to September 1960.
The signing of the Indus Water Treaty.
Right, between India and Pakistan. And it wasn't just, a bilateral handshake. It was heavily brokered by the World Bank.
Specifically, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the IBRD, which is a crucial detail, by the way.
Why is that so critical?
Well, the World Bank stepping in to mediate a sovereign resource dispute was pretty much unprecedented. They were dealing with the Indus River system, so that's the main river, and its 5 major tributaries.
Right.
And they realized right away that you can't just measure and divide flowing water drop by drop across a heavily militarized hostile border. The math is impossible.
It just doesn't work.
Right. So they took a very clinical approach. They divided the rivers themselves into 2 distinct categories, the eastern rivers and the western rivers.
And this is where I want you, the listener, to do a quick mental exercise with us. Just visualize the map and try to mentally recall this geography because it anchors literally every single flashpoint we're going to discuss.
It's the whole foundation.
Yeah, so you have the 3 eastern rivers, the Sutlej, the Beas, and the Ravi. Under the 1960 text, India gets unrestricted use of all the water in these eastern rivers.
100% of it.
Right. Now look further north and west at the 3 western rivers, the Jhelum, the Chenab, and the Indus itself. For these, India is legally obligated to let the water flow downstream into Pakistan.
And when you actually calculate the volume of that division, it results in an 80-20 split.
Wow.
Yeah, the treaty allocated roughly 80% of the water from this entire 6-river system to Pakistan.
Okay, hold on. I have to challenge the premise of that on behalf of anyone listening right now. India is the upper riparian state.
Yeah.
Geographically speaking, these rivers flow through Indian territory before they ever reach the Pakistani border. India physically controls the tap. Why would any nation willingly agree to only keep 20% of a resource they geographically dominate? What was the strategic logic there?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But the strategic logic was rooted in buying long-term stability for nation building. Remember, this is 1960.
Right, both newly independent.
Exactly. Both countries are facing massive poverty, trying to secure their agricultural sectors. The World Bank essentially convinced them that an unending, violent dispute over water would paralyze their economic development.
So as a trade-off.
A massive geo-economic trade-off.
Right.
By conceding that 80%, India secured guaranteed, undisputed rights to those eastern rivers, which it desperately needed to irrigate and develop its own agricultural heartland in Punjab.
Okay, that makes sense. But India didn't just abandon the western rivers entirely, right? They retained some legal carve-outs.
Precisely. India retained rights on the western rivers for what the treaty calls non-consumptive needs.
Non-consumptive, so meaning they can't use it up.
Right. It means India can use the water for domestic use, non-consumptive irrigation, and crucially, the generation of hydroelectric power.
But only if it doesn't disrupt the flow.
Exactly, provided it doesn't fundamentally disrupt the volume or the timing of the flow reaching Pakistan. And to police this highly complex arrangement, they established the Permanent Indus Commission.
The PIC.
Yeah, a bilateral body meant to hash out technical disputes before they became political crises.
And just as a quick geographical footnote, it is wild to consider that the Indus River actually originates in Tibet, yet China is completely absent from this treaty.
Yeah, a massive missing stakeholder.
Totally. But, for 64 years, this bilateral mechanism mostly held. Disputes were settled by commissioners and international arbitrators, not tank battalions, but that non-consumptive use clause.
Oh, that was a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. The moment abstract legal text met physical concrete, the friction started.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the friction was completely inevitable. I mean, India is an emerging power with massive energy and infrastructure needs. Over the decades, Pakistan began raising fierce objections to Indian engineering projects on those western rivers.
And the earliest major test of this was the Tolbul project, right? Which I think Pakistan refers to as the Wooler Barrage.
Yes, located on the Jhelum River.
Right, so let's break down the mechanics of Tolbul. The Jhelum River isn't just a body of water. It's a vital intrastate highway in Kashmir for moving goods and people.
It's an economic artery.
Exactly. But to keep commercial boats floating, you need a minimum water depth, which engineers call draft. India needed a minimum draft of 4.5 feet. But during the harsh winters, the water level naturally drops to just 2.5 feet.
And a 2.5-foot depth renders commercial navigation impossible. The economic arteries just freeze.
So India's engineering solution was to build a 439-foot-long barrage at the mouth of Wooler Lake.
A massive structure.
Right. The mechanism is pretty straightforward. You use the barrage to hold back water during the high flow season, and then systematically release it during the winter to maintain that 4.5-foot draft.
Across two key commercial stretches, right?
Yeah, a 20-kilometer stretch from Anantnag to Baramulla, and a 22-kilometer run between Sopore and Baramulla.
But here's the issue. When Pakistan looked at the blueprints for a 439-foot control structure, they didn't see a navigation aid. They saw an existential security threat.
Wait, so Pakistan's fear was that a navigation barrage could trigger a severe drought or catastrophic flooding downstream? Is that actually mathematically possible based on the volume of Wooler Lake, or was that purely, like, geopolitical paranoia?
Well, it's a mix of both, but the physical leverage is very real. If India controls a barrage of that size, they possess the physical capability to alter the hydrography of the Jhelum.
Because they literally control the gates.
Exactly. For Pakistan, the Jhelum isn't just a river, it's the feed water for their massive Triple Canal project. Yeah, that project connects the Jhelum and Chenab rivers to the Upper Bari Doab Canal. That canal system waters Pakistan's agricultural breadbasket.
So if the water stops.
If India holds the Wooler water back during crucial sowing seasons, Pakistani crops die. So the paranoia stems from the fact that the barrage gives India the theoretical capacity to weaponize the river flow.
And the tension over this escalated so much that in 1987, India actually unilaterally halted the Tolbul project just to de-escalate.
Right, they downed tools and walked away for decades. But the engineering ambitions absolutely didn't stop there. Let's look at a much more recent and frankly staggering engineering marvel, the Kishanganga-Haidel project.
Oh man, Kishanganga. The geography here is critical. This project sits on the Kishanganga River, which is a tributary of the Jhelum.
And once that river crosses the line of control into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, it's known as the Neelam.
Right. And India's engineering approach here was radically aggressive. They didn't just build a dam, they built a 24.23-kilometer-long tunnel directly through the Himalayan mountains.
Think about that for a second. Tunneling over 24 kilometers through a mountain to redirect a river.
Explain how that asserts control, though.
Well, it's a classic run-of-the-river hydroelectric scheme, but with a massive diversion. They diverted the water through that mountain tunnel to an underground 330-megawatt powerhouse at Bandipur in North Kashmir.
Okay.
By tunneling through the mountain, India isn't just generating, 1,713 million units of electricity. They are proving they can physically reroute a tributary of the Jhelum before it ever crosses the border.
Which obviously panicked Pakistan.
Completely. Pakistan dragged India to the Hague-based International Court of Arbitration over this, arguing it violated the treaty's restrictions on diverting Western rivers.
And the Hague ultimately ruled in India's favor, right? Provided they maintained a minimum flow.
Yes, which was a huge legal win for India.
Which led to Prime Minister Modi officially inaugurating the Kishanga station on May 19, 2018, while simultaneously laying the foundation for an even larger 1,000-megawatt Pakul Dul project in Kishwar.
Right, and it wasn't just about adding megawatts to the national power grid. It was India legally flexing its muscles, proving it could master the physical terrain and assert absolute administrative control right up to the very edge of the 1960 treaty's legal limits.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the 64-year-old treaty had survived these intense engineering stress tests, but the foundational architecture was buckling. And in January 2023, India completely changed its posture.
A massive pivot.
Yeah, they
That
didn't just defend a new dam, they went after the treaty itself. India issued an unprecedented diplomatic notice giving Pakistan exactly 90 days to enter into intergovernmental negotiations.
to rectify what India classified as a material breach of the treaty.
Exactly.
This was a seismic shift. India essentially looked at the 1960 text and declared it completely blind to modern realities. You have to trace the cause-effect chain here. The first massive reality check is climate change and demographics.
Because there's just way more people now.
It's exactly. Since 1960, the populations of both nations have exploded, driving water demand through the roof. Simultaneously, climate change is shrinking the Himalayan glaciers that feed the Indus Basin. The treaty was negotiated based on a static baseline of water availability that simply doesn't exist anymore.
And beyond the shrinking water supply, there's a fundamental clash of technology. Well, it's like trying to run a brand new 2025 operating system on a computer built in 1960.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the hardware, which is modern, efficient dam engineering, simply crashes against the rigid, outdated code of the original treaty.
That analogy perfectly captures the engineering dilemma. The 1960 treaty contains highly prescriptive, restrictive rules about exactly how dams on the western rivers must be designed.
Like what?
For instance, modern dams, like India's Baglahar project, require deep sluice gates to periodically flush out sediment. It's a critical safety feature in Himalayan rivers because of all the silt.
Right, you have to flush the mud out.
It's exactly. But the 1960 text largely forbids deep gates for upper riparian states, fearing they could be used to suddenly drain a reservoir and flood Pakistan. So every time India tries to implement modern, safer engineering standards, the 1960 rules trigger a bilateral dispute.
But the 2023 notice wasn't just about engineering specs, was it? India also demanded an overhaul of the dispute resolution mechanism itself. Are we supposed to believe the three-step process laid out in the 60s was completely broken?
Well, from India's perspective, yes, it was being weaponized. The treaty relies on a sequence, the Permanent Indus Commission, then a neutral expert, and finally an international court of arbitration.
Right.
India's grievance was that Pakistan was leapfrogging the bilateral mechanisms and rushing straight to international arbitration at The Hague for every minor technical disagreement.
Skipping the local steps.
Exactly. India wanted to force negotiations to exhaust all domestic and bilateral avenues before internationalizing the issue. Furthermore, India demanded deep transparency, better real-time data sharing, and genuinely empowering the respective water commissions.
So you have this 90-day notice in January 2023, a demand to modernize, a demand to stop internationalizing disputes, and it goes nowhere.
Nowhere at all.
The diplomatic warnings hit a wall of silence, which basically sets the stage for a geopolitical earthquake. All it took was a single spark.
And that spark arrived in the form of a severe security crisis. We're talking about the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, which Indian intelligence firmly linked to Pakistan.
Right. And following that attack, the Indian government initiated a massive action designated Op-Sindoor. And in April 2025, they took a step that had never been taken since the ink dried on the World Bank parchment.
Never.
India completely suspended the Indus Water Treaty. They placed it in formal abeyance.
We really have to unpack what abeyance actually translates to on the physical ground, because it is an astonishing display of hard power. The immediate impact wasn't just paperwork, it was heavy machinery.
Right. They moved quickly.
India immediately commenced massive desilting operations on several dams across the western rivers.
And explain the mechanics of desilting, because this is how the geopolitical leverage is actually applied. How does clearing mud stop a river?
So Himalayan rivers carry enormous amounts of silt. Over time, that mud builds up against the dam, threatening its structural integrity. To clear it to disilt, you physically have to close the gates, restrict the downstream flow, and flush the system.
Wow.
By initiating widespread synchronized desilting operations on the Jhelum and the Chenab, India essentially choked off the downstream flow into Pakistan. They used routine infrastructure maintenance to severely disrupt Pakistan's water supply.
And remember the Tulbul Navigation Project, the one India unilaterally suspended back in 1987 to de-escalate tensions.
Yeah, they brought it back.
As part of Op-Sindoor, India announced they were immediately resuming construction on that 439-foot barrage. But the most aggressive move wasn't even in Kashmir. India announced new mega-canal projects designed to divert water previously allocated to Pakistan and send it straight into the arid Indian state of Rajasthan.
Which, perfectly aligns with India's broader domestic push for strategic autonomy and self-reliance at Manar for Marat. in agriculture and water security.
Right.
But let's look at the immediate economic and security implications for Pakistan. They operate with a highly fragile economy, heavily reliant on agriculture in the Punjab and Sindh provinces. When the water from the Jhelum and Chenabs is disrupted, their crop yields plummet.
It's devastating economically.
Absolutely. However, most strategic analysts agree that India's suspension was a massive political signal rather than a permanent attempt to literally starve Pakistan of water.
It's a leverage play.
Exactly. It's a calculated demonstration of geo-economic vulnerability. India is signaling that the old rules of engagement where water unconditionally flows downstream regardless of cross-border terrorism are permanently over. Trade, security, and resource management are no longer compartmentalized.
But you can't just pause an international treaty of this magnitude without the global legal architecture getting involved.
No, definitely not.
And this instantly triggered a massive legal standoff. By May 2025, Pakistan had submitted aggressive written arguments to the Hague-based Court of Arbitration. Their central argument is deeply rooted in international law. The text of the 1960 treaty simply does not contain a suspension clause.
Right. You cannot unilaterally hit the pause button.
And in June 2025, the Court of Arbitration issued a supplemental award. They reaffirmed their own jurisdiction over the dispute and formally sided with Pakistan, ruling that the Indus Water Treaty does not permit one-sided suspension or abeyance.
And Pakistan obviously celebrated this as a definitive legal victory that validated their interpretation of the 1960 text.
But India's response to the Hague ruling was unprecedented. They didn't appeal. They wholly rejected the competence of the court to even rule on the matter.
Just completely ignored it.
Yeah, they labeled the international court itself illegal in this specific context and signaled they will not recognize any subsequent rulings from the Hague. And I want to be incredibly clear here, as we are looking at this strictly through an impartial analytical lens,
Right.
Pakistan's official position insists on strict adherence to the international legal mechanism drafted in 1960. India's official position has moved entirely beyond the 1960 text, making their ultimate demand explicit. There will be no return to normal water sharing without a complete, verifiable end to proxy war against India.
This raises an important question, though, and it is the central dilemma of modern geopolitics. How does a sovereign nation balance international legal obligations with overriding national security concerns?
It's the ultimate tightrope.
Exactly. India is actively choosing to bypass international court jurisdiction because it views the cross-border security situation as a fundamental breach of trust that nullifies the original spirit of the agreement.
Right.
For Pakistan, international law is the only institutional shield they have to protect their critical water security. We are witnessing a historic rupture in South Asia's institutional architecture, reflecting a broader global trend where major powers are increasingly bypassing post-World War II international institutions.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a piece of paper signed in 1960, a mathematical 80-20 division of mighty rivers brokered by the World Bank, designed to buy peace and secure agricultural futures.
Yeah.
We saw that mathematical division tested by incredibly complex engineering projects, 24-kilometer mountain tunnels, and 439-foot navigation barrages that became sources of deep existential anxiety. We watched the foundational logic of the treaty buckle under the modern weight of climate change, exploding populations, and a rigid refusal to adapt to new dam technology.
It was a perfect storm.
And finally, we watched it shatter completely in 2025, suspended in the wake of terrorism, and tangled in international courts whose authority is no longer universally recognized.
It leaves the entire region in completely uncharted territory. And I want to leave you with a final thought to consider as you digest the sheer scale of what we've covered today. The Indus Water Treaty was a product of an optimistic era that believed natural resources could be neatly separated from geopolitics.
Right. Keep the water out of the war.
Exactly. But look at the trajectory we are on. If climate change continues to aggressively shrink global water supplies, and if foundational, historically bulletproof treaties like this one can be suspended and weaponized in response to security crises, are we entering a new, brutal era of hydrohegemony?
Wow.
An era where water is no longer viewed as a shared human right protected by international law, but rather as the ultimate, unregulated weapon of statecraft.
That is a chilling thought and definitely something to chew on the next time you turn on the tap. Water as the ultimate geopolitical weapon. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you next time.